Welcome to Hyperspace Prospector. I'll be discussing the Star Wars High Republic Phase 1 novel Race to Crashpoint Tower by Daniel José Oder. These were my running thoughts as I was rereading it. And it came out in 2021, so it's been a couple of years, and honestly, I forgot a lot of it. Ram is one of my favorite High Republic Jedi. At this point, he hasn't gotten to his Darth Maul cosplay stage yet. He's still hiding in his garage. I love this opening scene where we find him with speeder bike parts like floating in the air around him, and he's covered in grease, is a complete disaster, and he's just meditating on engine parts. Right from the beginning, we know he is not a typical Jedi. It's so cute that the first move he makes when he actually has to be in battle is not to pull out his lightsaber and be all cool. No, he's reaching out with the Force and disrupting mechanical parts. In other words, he knows where his strengths are, and he's kind of proud of them. He's like Imri in that he doesn't use the Force in the same way as everyone else. But unlike Imri, he kind of embraces that fact and is like, this is who I am, deal with it. I had completely forgotten about some of the nuances of early Nihil path engines because for a lot of the story, they can't really use them exactly as they were originally intended. I had actually completely forgotten that they can jump in and out of Atmo in the early days. That kind of freaked me out, to be honest. I was like, what are we doing here? The Nihil can just jump in and jump out. I was like, oh, they are scary even without levelers. Here's another character that I adore, Zine. She grew up as an extremely Force-sensitive individual in a compound that's like an offshoot future version of the Path of the Open Hand. And obviously they distrust Force users and treat them horribly and treat them like a disease. And maybe I'm biased as someone who is part of the LGBTQIA community, but it kind of feels a little bit like this is a stand-in for those of us who grew up in very religious households who were taught from a young age that we were broken and wrong and evil and that we had to be fixed. And we could not openly be who we were. And so I think that's why I was drawn to Zine right away, even though in her situation it was talking about the Force, not who she loved. It felt similar. It's really hard to break out of that and basically push all that aside, go off on your own, or with the Jedi in this case. It's terrifying. And I'm so proud of her. You know who I'm not proud of? The Jedi. Yeah. So here we have a beautiful young woman who has been told her whole life that she is worthless, that she can't use her powers. And instead of saying, oh my goodness, I am so sorry, you know what? You're a little behind on your training, but that's okay. Jump in with the younglings. It'll be awkward at first, but that's okay. We'll get you up to speed. We'll get you into the Jedi Order. We've got you, girl. You know, that's what I wanted for her. And you know what they ended up doing? You're too old to be trained. The Padawans, they don't seem to understand what is wrong with the Order. They're like, you know what? The Jedi Order, you're wrong. We love Zine. We're just going to bring her along, and she's going to act like a Padawan in every other way other than the name. She doesn't have a lightsaber, but she's one of us. We accept her. And I think that was so sweet. But I am so annoyed at the Jedi Council for this. It was not her fault that you didn't find her as a kid. It was her, like, conservative family. Why are you punishing her for this? Anyway, sorry. Rant over. Actually, not quite over. Because there's another slight thing, which is she had a friend back at the compound And she had to hide the fact that she could use the Force, or he would have rejected her, which he did end up rejecting her and like literally joining the Nihil. He was so upset. If you have a friend and you have to hide part of who you are to maintain the friendship, I have news for you. It's not a friendship. Zine learned that the hard way. But you don't have to. You can read this book and realize, maybe not such a good idea. It was interesting to see more fallout from the hyperspace disaster. We saw some of that in Jedi Survivor as a tie-in. And here we go again. Beautiful planet, destroyed, basically, by the emergences. We went from a lush forest and waterway, great place to live, to a desert. Onto a positive Jedi thing. We see here a form of slow walking meditation. And I've done some labyrinth walking meditations. They are incredibly calming and helpful. And as a result of reading this book, or rather rereading it and remembering, I have started doing it again. On particularly upsetting days, slow walking labyrinth style meditation exercises, it helps. If you've never tried it, check it out. Especially if you're not someone who likes to sit and meditate, because I know that that is hard to do. It's like top tier. You've really gotten advanced and you're really good at it. Walking meditation is much easier to start with. Speaking of one of the Padawans, Lula, I wrote down a quote, and she's talking about arriving and seeing the devastation. There was no enemy to confront and defeat. Just the slow sadness of a world barely holding on to its own existence. I feel like that can be our lives sometimes. There's no enemy, there's no bad guy, just the slow sadness of a world barely holding on. I feel that, Lula. I feel that. This was very interesting to read after having read Phase 2. We see here one of the elders of the compound has been taken because they're trying to find a weapon. I don't honestly remember what they were looking for because it's been so long since I read Phase 1. But my guess is probably the levelers. Knowing what the background of this, I guess you could say, Force cult, or don't use the Force cult, rather, is coming out of, really adds a lot of depth to Phase 1. And at first I was wondering, why in the world did they come out with these books and then the prequels, other than trying to mimic the release dates of the movies? I think it was to make them richer when you reread them like this. Knowing all this Path of the Open Hand backstory turns it from, what a weird group of people, to, we're in trouble. I have to talk about the Acolyte here. I think the group of, they're kind of generically being called Force Witches that show up, is another future reiteration of the Force will be free philosophy. Because we see here a similar cult offshoot. My guess is that they're another one. And that's why they're fighting and trying to kill Jedi in the trailer. And what I saw before The Phantom Menace in the scene that they put in the theaters. This is just another group of the Force will be free. Meanwhile, utter chaos is going on as the Republic Fair is being attacked. And I love watching Ram at work. He goes off. He fights his way through the Nihil. He tries to repair the comms tower. He gets all the way back. And he needs to tell the Jedi, hey, we're under attack. No one believes he's a Padawan. Ram couldn't argue. He was covered in grease and dirt. He had his goggles on and his whole toolkit with him. All the other Padawans were probably in their pristine temple attire, standing serenely at the ceremony. I think it was later on someone kind of took a look at him and was like, wow, he's a complete mess. But also, I get the feeling he looks like this a lot. You're not wrong. He's the Kaylee of the Jedi Order.
Better to just take your G line, plug it straight into the port pin lock, and that should, there.
For any Firefly fans out there. There was another interesting discussion. Vernestra shows up and is talking to Lula, one of the Padawans. They're under attack because they suspect the Nihil are going to pull something, so they show up and find themselves in the middle of just a huge space battle. Balance. If we're not scared at all, we can't be courageous, right? And we might make mistakes in our arrogance, but if we're overcome by terror, we'll be useless too. Don't let one emotion take over. If you're too scared, you can't fight back. You can't help people. If you're not scared, you become arrogant, make mistakes, and can't help people. You have to be part scared, part courageous. That is the Jedi way. Getting towards the end of the story, I absolutely adore this section. When they're in the zoo and there's poison gas everywhere and these massive monstrous creatures are popping in and out, just yanking people, eating them. And they're running around and they'll run out of the fog and boom, there's a bunch of Nihil right there. And they're like running back into the fog. It reminded me a little bit of the scene from The Mandalorian where we first see Ahsoka and she's kind of in that fog and she just kind of appears and her saber comes out and poof. Imagine that, but on a much grander scale, and that's what's going on. So exciting. They also did things like explain why the Jedi didn't simply dispel the poison fog. It takes a large group of them really making a concerted effort together to do that. Otherwise, you're just wasting your force potential, you'll drain yourself, and you won't be very useful for much else. So, for example, we see Lula grabbing masks off some Nihil as she's fighting them, so she and Ram have something to breathe through. In The Phantom Menace, Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon get hit with that gas. They just hold their breath extra long. They don't try to dispel it either. There's only 2 of them, and they knew more was coming. But it also makes me wonder, after all of this with the Nihil, why didn't the Jedi just give them little gas masks to have with them? Because they had rebreathers for going underwater. I feel like it would be standard issue. I mean, I know it has been a long time, but to me it would make sense if I was a Jedi to just have a mask with me, knowing chemical attacks could happen. I also wonder where they keep their deodorant, because like, you're running around without any satchel most of the time as a Jedi. Do you keep it in your boots? Like, where do you keep standard stuff? Razors and combs. I mean, they have those tiny little things on their belt, but that's not enough. The clones all had backpacks. That makes sense. But if you're a Jedi and you're running around, where do you keep your like day-to-day stuff you need? I have questions. The last scene that really caught my attention was the difference between how Vernestra views her lightsaber and how Ram does. Vernestra has a very interesting relationship with hers. She doesn't quite trust other people to look at it or touch it. With her lightsaber, she's like, why are you looking at it? What do you want with my lightsaber? Meanwhile, we have Ram. There's a battle going on, and he's like, oh, hello person I met 5 seconds ago. You seem nice. Here, take my lightsaber. He's probably the kind of person where he'd give it away, let someone borrow it, forget it by leaving it on a table somewhere, and then like a week later, his master comes up and goes, okay, are you ready for lightsaber drills? And Ram will be like, lightsaber drills. Where did I leave it? Hey, can I just go back to the garage? Meanwhile, Vernestra probably has like tracking devices on her lightsaber. People she's known for years, like Avon, she's like, no, you're not touching it. No, no. I just think it's interesting to see their different personalities and the way different Jedi view their sabers. I mean, we have the famous scene, of course, between Obi-Wan and Anakin.
This weapon is your life.
I try, Master. In other words, it's kind of like if Vernestra had Ram as her Padawan instead of Imri. Of course, Imri, he doesn't like lightsabers either. He's like, why do we have these? It seems like the opposite of what a Jedi should be using. It's a weapon. In the High Republic, I really enjoy how different each Jedi is. They see the Force differently. Like Avar seeing it as a song and thus always humming to herself annoyingly. But we also see them viewing their kyber crystal and their lightsaber differently. We got to give an award to Vernestra because she only crashed one ship this book. Overall, this was a lot of fun, especially the whole sequence in the zoo. This particular group of characters is my favorite in High Republic. I mean, we see them all the way through to Phase 3. If the book has Ram in it, it's gonna be good. Like, there's no book where Ram is a character in it and you're like, eh. And the same with Zine. She's also awesome. Definite thumbs up for Race to Crashpoint Tower, for light and life.